Bonsoir mesdames et messieurs et bienvenue à la troisième conférence-concert de la série Recherche en lumière. Good evening ladies and gentlemen and welcome to the third lecture concert for the Research Alive series. I'm Steve McAdams and I'm co-organizing this series with Kit Soden. Je m'appelle Steve McAdams et je co-organise cette série avec Kit Soden qui est un doctorant en composition. With this series, we aim to bring alive the humanistic, scientific, and engineering research in music, as well as the research that goes on behind the scenes in performance and composition, and which leads up to the final product on stage. Each event is given by a member of the Schulich School to bring to light their research, illustrated with live musical examples, and then ending with a small piece to tie it all together. The next lecture concert will end this inaugural season with Professor George Massenberg, a world-renowned sound recordist and developer of recording technologies, who will delve into the intricacies of what it takes to make a Grammy-winning recording. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest for this evening. Well, that's me, I guess, for a change. And I'm an experimental psychologist. I'm interested in the perception and cognition of music listening. And I like to call myself a psychomusicologist because I'm trying to understand musical phenomena by exploring what is going on in our minds when we listen to, react emotionally to, and enjoy music. And this evening I have the great pleasure to collaborate with the magnificent McGill Wind Symphony. This is really a dream come true for me to be able to illustrate these ideas with live music on stage with a large ensemble. And this dream has been made possible by my dear friend and colleague, so please welcome the dream weaver himself, Professor Alain Cazes. One of the most magical and mysterious aspects of music, which is very little studied by musicologists, music theorists, and music psychologists, is how composers use musical instruments and their combinations to create sonic richness through orchestration. A lot of what goes on in the perception of orchestrated music depends on basic processes of auditory perception. So let's consider those first. We organize the world around us into various sound sources that are set into vibration by certain events. To do this, we use perceptual processes that are endowed by our genetic heritage and that are also shaped by our environment. These are all very important for survival. For example, if you're hunting in the Amazonian jungle, you need to pay attention all around you to the various sources of sound: a bird call, the wind rustling through the leaves, rain falling, a cracking twig, which may signal the presence of something that wants to eat you, or perhaps something you're hunting that you want to eat. The perceptual processes that allow us to separate out the different sources of sound in the environment contribute to what the McGill psychologist Al Bregman, who's here with us this evening, he calls auditory scene analysis. Actually, Al Bregman was also my mentor when I was an undergrad here in psychology back in the 70s. So in this particular case, we're interested in the issues of where we're trying to understand what's going on in a sound world, okay? And oftentimes, the psychologist Colin Cherry studied how we understand speech in noisy environments, and he dubbed it the cocktail party effect. It is related to our ability to focus on and track through time a single sound source in a noisy environment. And in this particular case, there's no coordination among the sound sources. People are talking, glasses are clinking, musicians are playing, and everything is ringing in the room, and you're trying to sensory sources, and you're trying to As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, when things start to get very difficult, it takes a lot of attentional resources to actually follow the sound source that you're trying to pay attention to, and when it gets really loud, it causes auditory masking. In fact, you carry all this perceptual baggage of organizing the sound world into the concert hall, and it's endowed upon us by evolution and shaped by our own live experience with multiple sound sources. So in the concert hall, music also has very many sound sources, but they are generally highly coordinated, with the exception of what just happened in this particular room right here, and also in certain styles of aleatoric music. Good composers understand these perceptual principles intuitively, and they use orchestration in various ways to create virtual sound sources by blending together instruments. They try to maximize the distinction between different musical lines. They try to draw attention to an instrument that is carrying an important melody, and they use it to structure musical materials as well. So in the Brahms Double Concerto, which is shown here being played by Axel Strauss and Matt Heimovitz with the McGill Symphony Orchestra, at times the violin and cello need to be heard individually. At times they are blending together and are even blending into the orchestra. Brahms had to understand what to do in order to make sure that when he wanted the different instruments to be heard separately, they were, or when he wanted them to blend, they did so. These are issues of composition in general, but more specifically of orchestration, because instrument choice can affect enormously how we perceive the music, as you'll see later in this talk. So what is orchestration? My former PhD student, Sven Amin Lemke, studied the way different instruments blend together, and he received the Governor General's Gold Medal for his dissertation on this topic. He often used this slide by the French artist Man Ray to show how you can see different forms by their outlines, by the way they overlap, creating zones with new colors where the original colors have blended together. So for example, this form right here, which is in red, is overlapping with a yellow form, so you get an orange region. Or this blue one here overlaps with the yellow, becomes green, and then purple when it overlaps with the red. I find that this painting captures metaphorically similar kinds of things that go on in orchestration. I would like to point out in passing how this word has crept into everyday language. First of all, to orchestrate comes from the French word orchestre or orchestrer, and the usage of the verb itself dates from the late 19th century. It means to arrange or score music for orchestral performance. But there's another word which is not musical, a sense of it which means to arrange or direct the elements of a situation to produce a desired or maximum effect, especially surreptitiously, as in the developers were able to orchestrate a favorable media campaign. Note how the process of orchestration of musical instruments has been mapped metaphorically onto notions of arrangement with respect to a desired result. What is involved in orchestration? Well, the combinations composers choose depend on deep knowledge of how instruments sound at different pitch registers and at different dynamics or playing levels, so soft versus loud. The goals of orchestration can be as diverse as creating new timbres through blending of instruments, or creating a trajectory of increasing instrumental power in a dramatic gesture of some kind, contrasting different sections with changes in instrumentation, and integrating instruments into a homogeneous texture, or maximally distinguishing the melodic and rhythmic materials that they carry. Obviously, as composition professor John Rea has intoned, orchestration is in many cases the handmaiden of composition more generally, and so it must work in concert with melodic, rhythmic, harmonic, metric, textural, and formal considerations. So orchestration involves creating and contrasting different musical timbres. But what is timbre? This is a little wink at the French artist René Magritte that was found by my former PhD student Anne Faure in France. Timbre, aside from its meaning in the French word meaning stamp, actually comes from a Greek word, which is tymbanon, which is related to the Greek word for drum, and it maintained the sense of drum in Old French. And in Middle French, it took on more meanings, including bell, timbrel, and drum. Now, the timbrel, or the taf of the ancient Hebrews, or the def of Islam, or the adufe of the Moors of Spain, was an instrument originating in the Middle East, similar to the modern tambourine. In French, the sound evolved into a sound more generally, relating to the sound of a bell. And in Middle English, back in the 14th century, appears the word timbre with a Y in it in this particular case. In psychoacoustics, the definition of it is the characteristic quality of a sound, independent of pitch, loudness, duration, and spatial position, from which its source or manner of production can be inferred. So we have two aspects here. One is the qualitative aspect, it's a quality of sound, and we use that quality to identify the source or the way the sound was produced in this particular case. Okay? So you can see from the musical definition that the characteristic quality of sound produced by a particular instrument or voice is what we oftentimes refer to as sound color. And it has both spectral aspects related to this sound color, but also the way the sound evolves in time as well. So let's have an example of how we do this. So let's start with the woodwinds. We're going to hear a flute, which is an air jet kind of sound, plus clarinet and alto sax, both of which have single reeds, and then oboe and bassoon, which have double reeds. And listen to the differences in the sound as they all try to play the same duration and the same dynamic. Okay, thank you. And in the brass instruments, we have the trumpet, the trombone, the horn, which is sometimes called a French horn, but is actually made in Germany, the euphonium, which is like a baby tuba, and the tuba itself. Now let's have these instruments play. Notice the similarities among the timbres of these instruments that distinguishes them from the woodwind. So some aspects of timbre actually tell us something about the family of the musical instruments that are being involved. Next, we have the percussion instruments, and we'll start with pitched percussion, ones that you can actually play melodies with. And we have the xylophone, the vibraphone, the glockenspiel, and the timpani. Notice the difference between wood and metal, with or without resonators, as with the xylophone and the vibraphone, but not the glockenspiel, and then a completely different instrument, which is the timpani, which is a membrane over a resonating chamber. Okay, and there's also percussion instruments that do not have pitches, which we call the unpitched percussion, and we have things like slapstick, triangle, ratchet, tambourine, snare drum, and tam-tam, all of which are used in the tekeli piece that we'll be looking at today. Okay, now these don't have a clear pitch. You can see the tam-tam a little bit, but generally they're used for rhythmic emphasis or emotional impact of some kind. Okay, thank you. Now there are subtle differences within instrument type as well. So let's look at, for example, the family of the clarinets. We have clarinets of different sizes, the sopranino or piccolo clarinet, the soprano clarinet, or what we call the normal clarinet, and then the bass clarinet. So you notice they're very similar, but there are subtle differences between them. And similarly for the saxophone family, we have alto, tenor, and baritone sax. So as you can hear, timbrally speaking, size matters. Timbre changes with other musical parameters, for example, with pitch. Timbre changes with pitch in many instruments, and particularly so in the clarinet and horn. Different names and characters are even assigned to the registers by some orchestration treatise writers, such as Samuel Adler, as you can see for the clarinet here. He talks about the Chalumeau register, which is deep and rich here, then throat tones, which are a little bit paler, and then the clarino or clarion register, which is a bright, incisive, and expressive tone, and then the piercing and shrill register very up high. And so we'll hear the clarinet playing from very low to very high, so you can hear the change in timbre that happens. Thank you. But timbral differences among instruments, as they get really high, as they get higher, they have less and less frequencies involved, and so timbral differences get much smaller. So let's listen to an example of several timbres played by different instruments, but at a higher pitch. And you can hear how there's less difference between them in this particular case. Okay? So there are still differences, but they've become a little bit less, and if we went even higher, they would be even a little less. Timbre also changes with dynamics, and this is the playing effort, and particularly in brass instruments, which you get most brassier at higher dynamics. Dynamics are notated in music in this way. P stands for piano, which means soft in Italian, M is mezzo or medium, and F is forte or loud. So we have very soft, soft, medium loud, loud, very loud, and extremely loud. The trombone is an excellent example of this because it has a wide dynamic range. So let's listen to the trombone playing all of these different levels. Thank you very much. And notice the very strong change in the color of the trombone sound as it gets louder and louder. So by actually controlling pitch and controlling dynamics, you can change timbre as well. So what we understand about the ways that timbre changes with all these other parameters is that each instrument has a kind of a constrained universe of timbres at its disposal. And these timbres depend on the mechanics of the instrument, on the pitch and dynamics being played, as well as a number of other parameters under the performer's control, such as articulation, embouchure, and so on. These are all considerations that a composer must take into account when choosing an instrument or a combination of instruments for a particular compositional goal. Now let's consider perceptual grouping, which gets closer to the kinds of things we need to deal with in using timbre as an organizing force in music. There are several aspects of orchestration that depend on how things get grouped together perceptually during listening. We will explore where timbre comes from and how it arises from blending, how it then contributes to the perceptual integration or segregation of sequences of notes, how orchestral layers in the foreground or background of perception are created, how timbre creates local contrasts and larger scale structuring in terms of orchestral gestures and structures that create musical form. All of these possibilities make timbre what I call a form-bearing element. So our question is, how does timbre contribute to the forms that we hear in music? This black and white rendition of a painting by Kandinsky, you can clearly see form here on the basis of differences of brightness and darkness. But it doesn't have much emotional impact, and you certainly don't connect and contrast different parts of the painting as you would if the color aspects of hue and saturation were present. Notice how now a whole set of relations among different places across the canvas become apparent, and how some now take on meaning. We will demonstrate a similar effect with orchestration in a moment. To get at how timbre does this in music, we first analyze the orchestration decisions that are made in scores and their perceptual results through different recordings of the piece. This work is taking place in a large-scale international project funded by both provincial and federal funding agencies, and our long-term goal is to develop a psychological foundation for a theory of orchestration through the analysis of scores and orchestration treatises, through perceptual experimentation on orchestral excerpts, and through the development of digital tools for scholarship, musical creation, and pedagogy, in collaboration with colleagues here at McGill, but also at IRCAM in Paris and at the Haute École de Musique de Genève in Geneva. Here's an example of the analysis of a page of the Tekeli Symphony done by members of our team, composers Chris Goddard and Stephen Spencer. Today we'll be focusing on the first movement of that symphony called Shooting Stars. This particular graph shows blended instrument combinations in red, orange, and yellow. As you can see, these boxes group things that are all blended together. So all of this, that, and that, and that all blend together. All of these orange boxes that overlap here blend together, and then the yellow boxes at a particular point in time also blend. The blue boxes, which you can just barely see up here, basically are indicating shifts or timbral shifts in orchestration. So this group here makes one blend, and it's then juxtaposed with the next one, which is a different group of instruments. So I'm getting this alternation between two sets of instruments, which create shifts in the timbral perception that's going on, okay? So these analyses we feed into a database that we'll be developing, and it'll allow research to formulate questions about different orchestration effects and find pieces that use them. So let's get back to timbre and grouping. First, let's see where timbre comes from and how it arises from blending. Timbre requires the perceptual fusion of multiple acoustic components, such as those produced by a piccolo clarinet, for example. Each instrument has many modes of vibration, creating different frequencies, but they all get fused together into a single unified auditory image with its own timbre. Now here's a little melody played by the piccolo clarinet. But composers are clever beasts, and they sometimes try to trick your ears into hearing multiple sound sources perceptually fused into a single virtual sound source by having instruments play in specific harmonic relationships, having them starting and stopping at the same time, and having them move in perfect parallelism both in pitch and in dynamics. And all of these principles signal to the brain that all these acoustic information should be grouped together. And when it is, it all contributes to the newly emerging timbre of the combination. That is, the sounds are blended and a new timbre emerges from the blend. Or said another way, what is perceived as the timbre depends on what gets fused together. Now I want everybody in this room to close your eyes, and we're going to have several instruments play that melody together, and I want you to try to hear out the different instruments that are being played. Okay, now I'm going to have the instrumentalists to stand up this time, and you can open your eyes and look at them. So now you can see who is actually playing this. So they're all playing the same melody at the same pitch or at the octave underneath, which allows them to blend together very well. And they're playing with the same phrasing as the piccolo clarinet first did. So they're moving everything in parallel, dynamics and pitch and all that. They're starting and stopping at the same time. So all of the conditions are united for facilitating blend of these different instruments together. Now let's see how these play out in Kelly's piece. On this first page of the score, there are three musical ideas that are overlapping in time. Each one has blend going on in it, so we will consider each one separately. The main theme comes back many times in this piece, and you'll easily recognize it because of the strident high E-flat clarinet and the distinctive rhythm. So basically what we'll first do is just hear the E-flat clarinet playing all by itself here. And then it's doubled by the alto saxophone played an octave and a fifth below. And now we're going to play the whole thing, and notice there's a bunch of other instruments that are playing, but they're not playing all the notes that are played by the clarinet. They play on certain notes and not others. So we have certain instruments coming in for some notes, others coming in for other notes, and so we're getting kind of timbral accents as all these things blend together. So let's hear this particular idea. Okay, so they're all playing synchronously and in harmonic relations, both of which favor blend. Note that I mentioned how the addition of specific instruments at various points in time serve to augment, highlight, or accentuate a certain musical pattern. This is similar to highlighting techniques with color in painting. Note that the impact of red and orange highlighting in this Korean dragon makes a big difference. So suddenly you have certain things showing up in red, like the fireball here of the sun created by this dragon, and its red nose, presumably because it's blowing so much fire all the time. Let's now move on to the next idea, which is a kind of cluster of trumpets. And they're all moving in the same direction, which facilitates the blend. So you can see them all rising up here. And then they're going to be underlined by some other instruments, notably some percussion down here, chimes and vibraphone, and then a French horn that'll play right here. But what we're going to do is build this up. We'll start with one trumpet, and we'll add in the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, and the next one, so you can hear as they accumulate what the effect is. And now we'll add in the French horn and there's a sort of a nice little sparkling effect added by the tubular bells here. Okay, so you hear the horn come in, but then it blends in with all the other sounds as they all do that kind of crescendo together there at the end. The another idea is, the last idea is a kind of syncopated punctuation that fills in the holes in the other rhythms that are going on. The very short synchronous notes and the harmonic relations help them blend together. So let's hear first the trombones that are playing down here. Okay? So the various devices that are used by the composer to achieve blend are different in each of these different musical ideas. Once timbre is formed by perceptual fusion, it can also be used as a structuring force in music. And one way to do this is to use timbral differences to segregate different musical materials. Or inversely, depending on your compositional aims, use timbral similarity to integrate musical materials into what Al Bregman has called an auditory stream. Now let's listen to the individual musical ideas on the first page of the score again, and this time notice how different they are in their timbral combinations. So first we'll hear the first group. And now the second one with the clusters. And then the punctuated blends. Okay, now we're going to play them all together and try to hear these individual ideas going on at the same time. So this would be perceptual segregation, where they are heard independently. Okay, why don't we play that one more time just so you can get a chance to maybe listen to one of the other ideas if you were focusing on one of them. Thank you. So, timbral differentiation helped you hear the ideas independently to some extent, although things are moving quite quickly in this passage, which the composer marks to be played with ecstatic energy. To see the effect of this differentiation, let's take away the differences in timbre by reorchestrating this passage for very similar instruments. So what we're going to do is take all of the other woodwinds and the brass, and we're going to put them in the clarinet. So we'll only have clarinet timbres playing together, with the exception of two notes in the bassoon, because we didn't have two of these. So first, we'll listen to the musical ideas independently. First, the main theme. And now the clusters. So there we've moved from the trumpets to the clarinets, and now the punctuated blends. Okay, now let's put all of those together again, and what we're going to do this time is we're going to play them all together in the clarinet version, and then you're going to juxtapose that to the original version. And what I want you to think about here is the extent to which you can hear the ideas more clearly in one over the other, and also, while you're at it, why not think about which one's more exciting? So first, the clarinet version. And now the original version. Okay, how many of you thought that the clarinet version was more clear and separated the ideas? And how many thought so for the original version? And how many cowards are there out there who are not deciding? Okay. And who thought that the clarinet version was more exciting? Oh, there's a few. Who thought the other one was more exciting? Okay, well, I think most people agree that Frank DeKelly had it right to start with, and I just messed up his music. Another way timbre can be used as a structuring force in music is in the formation of orchestral layers. By layers, I mean material that coheres in some way, that is heard as being bound together perceptually, often by having timbral characteristics that are not too different among the contributing instruments. Separate layers, on the other hand, are generally different in timbre. So it is the timbral similarity that holds the instruments together in a layer, and timbral differences that distinguish the layers, in addition to melodic and rhythmic characteristics, of course. And different layers have differing degrees of perceptual prominence. So we speak of foreground, middle ground, and background, with the most prominent musical material in the foreground. For an example, in a musical texture that has a solo, melody, and accompaniment, the solo melody usually occupies the foreground, and the accompaniment occupies the background. Here we have a painting by the Spanish painter Alberto Pla Rubio, in which foreground, middle ground, and background are enhanced with color differentiation. The girl, the field, and the nearby tree are in the foreground, the rust-colored bushes and tree in the shadow are in the middle ground, and the mountain, clouds, and sky are in the background. Let's listen to a passage where layering occurs in the Tekeli piece. The effect is fairly subtle here because all the parts are also interlocking or synchronized rhythmically, which tends to make them group together. But let's deconstruct it layer by layer and put it back together again to lead you into hearing the different layers. First, we'll hear the foreground layer with instruments playing in a higher register with slurred patterns alternating with staccato notes. And now we'll listen to a middle ground layer in a lower register with staccato punctuations and syncopation off the beat. And now we'll have the background layer in a middle register with jumping high-low staccato notes. Okay, so notice the differences in timbre between these different layers. And now we're going to put it all together. And notice what you tend to focus on. Is it the foreground layer? Okay, why don't we play that once more, and this time try to maybe focus on a different layer than the one you were focusing on this time. Okay, thank you. Now let's look at timbre-induced contrasts. Timbre can be used to create contrasts that enhance rhythmic patterns and also that distinguish juxtaposed musical ideas of small-scale gestures at a local level. Let's study an example of using timbral shifts between different combinations of instruments in what I call punctuation blends to enhance the vitality of a rhythmic pattern. In these two measures you can see on the screen here, in one of the transition regions from this movement, Tekeli orchestrates the rhythm with different instrument combinations. One, in red here, is with trumpets and horn, later joined by trombones in this particular place here. The next one is with bassoons, saxophones, horns, trombones, euphonium, and tuba for the other one in blue. Note that there are more instruments in the blue one, so it will probably be a little bit stronger and will serve as a kind of an accent in that particular case. There's one here, there's a little introduction of fast notes here in the trumpets, for example, between those two. So we have alternation between red, blue, but then there's that interjection of the orange part, and then blue, and then red again. And then underlying it all is this pattern, a very fast pattern in the vibraphone, which is punctuated up here by the clarinet as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to first take this rhythm and we're going to reduce it to its simplest expression, which would be like this. And we're going to hear, if I take all those instruments and I collapse them all into just the rhythm that's being played, this is what it looks like. So first we're going to listen to it on the snare drum. Very good. And now on the trumpet. Okay, so now you've got the same timbre each time playing that, first with a non-pitched instrument, now with a pitched instrument. And now let's listen to what happens when we actually play it as it's written and hear how the changes in timbre are going to create a very different kind of accent structure on this. Okay, and now that we're going to add in all the things that are in green here so we get the full rhythmic effect. Okay? So those are how timbral changes can actually affect our perception of the properties of a rhythmic structure. Short-term gestures are shapes that are built across the orchestra over a few seconds and are often juxtaposed with other gestures in a kind of orchestral contrast. One kind of orchestral contrast is a call and response pattern or antiphonal contrast. Antiphonal comes from the Greek meaning voice against voice. We'll consider a passage of this type at the beginning of the closing section of the movement. First of all, the call has an accumulation of dissonant chord building up in the low woodwinds, trumpets, and horns that I've summarized by the blue lines. So basically you see these little triangles are when instruments enter, and then they all sustain, so you slowly build up this cluster of blue sounds here. Over the top of that is a rising pattern and staccato notes in different instruments up here. So let's listen to this call pattern. Okay? The response has a fast legato passage that rises high up in the woodwinds and then dives down, and then is also joined by some very low instruments down there, and then with other low instruments that go in the opposite direction. So let's listen to the response pattern. Okay, so we have a rising pattern in the call and a falling pattern in the response. And then this continues a few times, so then we have it followed by another call. And another response. And then a more elaborated call. And then a slightly different elaborated response with 16th notes rising in the instruments. Okay, now you can hear these patterns are quite different, so now we're going to play everything together so you can hear the call, response, call, response, call, response kind of pattern, which is indicated but also by differences in texture and articulation, but also very much so by the instruments that are being used. Excellent, thank you very much. Now, another much larger scale shape that is often formed with the modulation of instrumental forces is what my former PhD student Megan Goodchild calls the orchestral gesture. Extended patterns of textural and timbral evolution often happen over tens of seconds or even a couple of minutes, and they create orchestral gestures that possess a certain cohesiveness as auditory images and have a goal-directed sense of motion. They're often used at dramatic moments in pieces of music. One such gesture is what has been called the orchestral crescendo, where instruments are progressively added to heighten the musical tension and the timbral power of the result. Megan Goodchild calls this the gradual addition gesture. We'll examine such a gesture in the Kelly piece. This graph shows the evolution of a number of instruments of each category over time in a section of the movement. Red bars are for the high woodwinds, green bars for the low woodwinds, purple bars for the high brass, blue bars for the low brass, and then orange shows in the percussion. In particular, notice here that we get particularly an increase in the number of high woodwinds and low brass and percussion as we get towards the end of this kind of crescendo that's happening. So now let's hear this whole orchestral crescendo. Definitely see the offense of adding all that different instrumental power there at the end. Finally, different orchestral characteristics are often used to reinforce large-scale formal structures, such as the sectional structure of this particular movement here. The movement we've been analyzing today is the first movement of Kelly's Second Symphony, and it has three different movements, all of which refer to sources of celestial light, and they're entitled Shooting Stars, Dreams Under a New Moon, and Apollo Unleashed, and you can hear the whole symphony this evening at the concert. Shooting Stars, the first movement, has a variant on what is called a rondo form. Rondo form is basically something that has an A material, and it's followed by a B material, and then A again, and then some new material, C, A, and D, and so on and so forth. Kelly makes a slightly different version of this. He goes A, B, A, C, A, B, D, and then has a transition region, back to B, and a transition to C, and then A, and then finally ends with a kind of coda. The interesting part here for our orchestration analysis is that each section has completely different character and uses orchestral colors and textures to distinguish them in addition. So what we'd like to do now is first play the A section as a combination of three different musical ideas that we began with, and listen to part of that one in its first instantiation. Okay? The B section is more lyrical with legato chords in the brass with occasional interjections by the woodwinds. And now let's hear this section. The C section, the first of which was the orchestral crescendo that we just heard, has a dancey rhythm with staccato patterns bouncing between the winds and brass, alternating with some more lilting rhythms that change the rhythmic feel. Now let's listen to that one again. And the D section has a feeling similar to section C, but acquires its own identity, particularly playing with and developing the lilting rhythm from the C section, juxtaposing it with punchier staccato material. Let's listen to part of that one. Good, thank you. Now we'll hear the whole movement in a moment so you can experience all these contrasts, but first I would like to make a few closing remarks. I'm fully aware that I haven't even touched on many important aspects of orchestration, such as why particular instruments are chosen for the character of a given passage, or how they underline formal processes in music, or even why certain timbral combinations are used to evoke a particular emotional tone, such as melancholy. One might think of the English horn solo in the third act of Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde, nationalistic majesty as portrayed by Sibelius brass instruments in the opening of Finlandia. But one thing I hope to have conveyed is that discussions of music can't be confined merely to melody and rhythm, as discussions of painting can't be confined to shapes and brightness. The wonder of much music comes with the way sound is colored with different musical instruments and their combinations, enhancing form, providing depth, and evoking feeling. Timbre is not merely cosmetic, musical lip gloss and eyeshadow, or, as the otherwise brilliant American music theorist Leonard Meyer says, only a secondary musical parameter. Timbre is a powerful structuring force and vehicle for musical expression and emotion that is achieved through orchestration and depends on many different perceptual processes that give rise to sonic richness. So let's now put everything I've been talking about together by playing the first movement of Frank Ticheli's Symphony No. 2 for concert band, played by the McGill Wind Symphony. Ladies and gentlemen, Alain Cazes and Alain Cazes. It always feels great when a dream comes true.